The Gospel of Luke was written during the 1st century. It was written to help readers be certain of the things that the writer Luke had been taught concerning Jesus Christ and the events surrounding his death and resurrection. But how does his account impact us today? What can we learn through this special book in order that we too may be certain? Join author and musician Michael Card as he journeys through this unique gospel and discover the amazing stories of Jesus Luke wanted his readers to know. That you may be certain, the Gospel of Luke, Part 2, on this day of discovery. The Gospel of Luke is known for being a carefully researched account of the life of Christ. The Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and John are eyewitness accounts of Jesus, written by these three men who traveled with him and heard him speak, men he called friends. Luke himself was not an eyewitness, but rather a careful observer of the experiences and accounts of others. Known as a physician and possibly a slave, Luke has a special sensitivity to the weak and helpless that comes through in his gospel, exposing a tender side of Jesus' character. Michael Card reveals the amazement expressed in Luke's gospel by those who came to be certain about who Jesus was.
Welcome to Northern Galilee, to a 4th century synagogue in the city of Kazreen. There are children here playing behind us. You're going to hear their voices like music. You would expect that in the 1st century, but you may hear an occasional backup horn. You wouldn't have heard that in the 1st century. We've come here to inform our imaginations, the imagination that ties our hearts and our minds together. And we're not just going wild with this. We're looking at the history, we're looking at the facts, but then we're doing something with the facts. We're engaging and trying to understand this person, Luke, in a whole new way. Now we know that he is a self-conscious writer because in the opening of his gospel, he tells us that he was not an eyewitness. That means he had to speak to eyewitnesses. Now that's an interesting fact, but let's engage with that. What does it mean that he had to speak to eyewitnesses? Well, it means that he had to collect their eyewitness testimony, and some things he would use, some things he wouldn't use. And as he's collecting these stories, 30 years after Jesus has been raised from the dead and ascended, 30 years later, he finds that people are still amazed by this story of Jesus, and Luke really resonates with that amazement. But one thing continually happens. He notices that people who should have understood what was going on, the Messiah and grace and all that Jesus was about. The people that should have understood Jesus didn't. The religious people, the wealthy people. And it was the simple people, the poor, usually women, who were able to understand exactly why Jesus had come and what his ministry was all about. And if you look at Luke, it's on almost every page. The first scene is Zechariah and Mary. Zechariah, a priest in the holy place, talking to Gabriel. And yet he doesn't believe. But Mary, this simple little girl, backwater part of the country, Gabriel tells her she's going to have this baby, and she immediately responds, "Behold, the slave of the master." See, she gets it. But it goes on and on. There's Zacchaeus and the rich young ruler. There's Simon the Pharisee, and then the sinful woman who wets Jesus' feet with her tears. See, the older religious men don't get it. The poor, the simple, the women do get it. And it even makes it into the parables. I mean, think of the parable of the Good Samaritan, a Samaritan who was really a despised person in Jesus' day. He understands. He stands and stays and helps the man who's hurt. But the priest and the Levite, they pass by and they don't care. Now, the wonderful thing about this literary motif is that it's explained. And it's explained by a moment in Jesus' life that is completely unique. It hadn't happened anyplace else in the Gospels. In chapter 10, Jesus overflows with joy. Luke says, Jesus, full of joy through the Holy Spirit, says to the Father, "I praise you, Father, that you have hidden these things from the wise and that you've revealed them to little children, like the children we hear outside the door." Jesus is excited that his Father is the kind of person that reveals things to people who usually don't get to understand it, that his Father is the kind of person who will turn the world upside down. if you really want to engage in a story or a novel, there are certain things you need to look for. The first words of the main character, that's one of those things, because it will set the tone for the rest of the story. Now, Luke is a marvelous storyteller, and so we need to listen carefully to the first words of Jesus. He's just 12 years old. Luke tells us that his family, they've all come up to celebrate the Passover in Jerusalem, and Jesus is with them. He's 12. This is the first year that he's going to become subject to the law. He's responsible to obey the law. Now, the Sanhedrin, sort of the supreme court, the ruling body in Judaism, they would have open-air discussions of the law in the temple courts during these festivals, and apparently that's the discussion that Jesus gets caught up in. 12 years old, wanders off from the group, and Joseph and Mary lose him for 3 days. They can't find him. They can't keep track of him. Imagine being entrusted with caring for the Messiah and you lose him for 3 days. Finally, they come back and they find Jesus, and he's absorbed in the conversation. And Mary, very maternal, it sounds like something my mother would say to me. She comes up to Jesus and she says, "Why have you treated us like this?" And this little boy who understands so much already, he can't understand why they looked any place else but the temple. He says, "Why were you looking everywhere? Didn't you know that I had to be here in my Father's house?" And Luke is very careful to tell us that Joseph and Mary didn't understand what he was talking about. See, those first words are misunderstood by his family who love him so much. It sets the tone for the rest of the book. Jesus is the misunderstood Messiah.
Now so it was that after 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the teachers, both listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers. So when they saw him, they were amazed, and his mother said to him, "Son, why have you done this to us? Look, your father and I have sought you anxiously." And he said to them, "Why did you seek me? Did you not know that I must be about my Father's business?" But they did not understand the statement which he spoke to them. Luke chapter 2.
Of all the places in the Bible land, some people call it the Holy Land, this for me is the most holy. This is Capernaum. Matthew referred to it as Jesus' own town because after he was kicked out of the synagogue in Nazareth, he relocates here, and this is the base of their ministry all the time they're in the Galilee. So this is an area that Jesus would have known. It's a wonderful place to come to. And this next story begins here in Peter's house, right after the story of the men who lowered their friend down through the ceiling. That was Peter's house that happened at. Luke begins a literary structure, and we have to appreciate his sensitivity for literature. Lots of wonderful structure in Luke. He brings a first-rate mind to his task and a marvelous vocabulary. And he's already told us a parallel structure, the birth of Jesus and the birth of John the Baptist. Wonderful parallelism there. He'll have a nice literary structure, a big block in the middle. 40% of Luke is the final journey to Jerusalem. But here, beginning in chapter 5, right after the healing of the paralyzed man, he begins this block with this verse. And immediately, as everyone watched the man jump to his feet, he picked up his mat and went home praising God. And here's the structure. Everyone was gripped with fear and wonder and awe. They praised God, saying over and over again, "We have seen amazing things." Now, doesn't that sound like a statement that's going to begin another block? We have seen amazing things, they say. And that word for amazing is the Greek word paradoxa, the word that we get our word paradoxical from. Because what happens after that statement, Luke collects a series of stories about how unorthodox, how paradoxical the ministry of Jesus is. It's very important for us to establish this early in the ministry. The very first thing he does, he picks Matthew to be a disciple. Matthew, a tax collector who everyone else would have hated. And then he'll be questioned about the fact that his disciples don't fast and pray the way they're supposed to. Very unorthodox. See? Then he'll heal on the Sabbath, which he's not supposed to do. Then they'll rub their hands together and eat the grain. That's like harvesting, which is also violating the Sabbath. A whole collection of stories, and you can see Luke's mind working as he puts them together. But then this story comes together in a closing phrase that is very beautiful and very pastoral to me. And see if this doesn't sound like an intentional statement that closes this block. Luke says, "When all the people heard this, including the unjust tax collectors, they agreed that God's plan was right, for they had been baptized by John. But the Pharisees and experts in religious law had rejected God's plan for them, for they refused John's baptism." It's a wonderful little scene into what the new kingdom is going to be like. Upside down, radically reversed. The tax collectors and the sinners are in, and the religious professionals are out. I like to think of Luke as the gospel of amazement. Everyone's amazed. Zechariah is amazed, the shepherds, Joseph and Mary, the people in Nazareth, the people in Capernaum, even the Pharisees are amazed. Luke exhausts the language of amazement. There are 7 different Greek words that can be translated to be amazed or to be astonished, and Luke is the only writer who uses all 7 of them. Sometimes he'll use 2 in the same verse. So Luke is amazed at the story that he's recording. And remember, he's talking to people 30 years after the event, but still 30 years later, when they tell Luke their story, they're still amazed. And the great hope is that you and I, as we engage with this story, will rediscover a sense of amazement for this incredible story. The Sea of Galilee, this wonderful, self-contained world. When you're here, it's like this is the only place in the world. Beyond those mountains, it's like there's just nothing. And here in Capernaum, on the north shore, this is the place where the boats would have come in, the disciples with their fish. And this is where Matthew would have been sitting at his tax table collecting taxes from the grumpy fishermen like Peter. After all the talk of amazement in the Gospel of Luke, if you're really listening to the text, eventually you've got to ask yourself, when is Jesus going to be amazed? And Luke makes us wait until chapter 7. It's a story that happened right here in Capernaum. Luke tells us about a centurion. Now, the centurions were the backbone of the Roman army, really depended on their leadership and their direction. And when they retired after 25 years, they were given an enormous bonus. And whenever they moved into a town like this little town, it was a great thing for the economy. They would bring their slaves, they would bring all this money. And Luke tells us that this centurion actually built a synagogue for the people. He was a man who honored Judaism. He was what we call a God-fearer. We'll meet lots of God-fearers in the book of Acts. Those are Gentiles who pray and keep a lot of the observances of Judaism, but they don't become full proselytes. He's also a special man because he cares for a slave that he has. And this is a time in history when slaves were usually abused by their masters. But this man is a different sort of man. He hears that Jesus has come to his town, and he sends some of the Jewish leaders from the synagogue to come and ask Jesus if he will come and heal his slave. And if you don't look closely enough, you'll miss it. The Jewish men come up to Jesus and they say, "You need to do this for this man. He built our synagogue. He's a good man. He deserves it." You underline those words in your Bible. He deserves it. Later on, the centurion sends Jesus another message from 2 of his friends. And the message is, "Jesus, I don't deserve it. I don't deserve to even have you come to my home. Nevertheless, if you'll just say the word, my servant will be healed." And at that point, Luke tells us, Jesus was amazed. The miracle of the healing of the servant you don't even get to see, because the point of the story isn't the miracle. The real miracle is the faith of the centurion. So when you ask yourself, what is it that amazes Jesus? The answer is faith.
When Jesus heard these things, he marveled at the centurion and turned around and said to the crowd that followed him, "I say to you, I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel. Luke chapter 7.
We're just outside the small village of Nain, right close to Nazareth where Jesus grew up. As you can see, it's occupied still, but in Jesus' day it was just a small village. Now Luke tells us a lot of stories the other Gospels don't tell us. Luke tells us the story of Anna the prophetess. He tells us the story of the widow that Jesus watches as she puts her 2 small coins into the temple treasury. Luke has a concern for women that the other Gospels don't share. And only Luke tells us the story of the widow of Nain. That as Jesus and a huge crowd of his followers were coming into the city, they meet another mass of people. It's a funeral. Her son has died. And leading the funeral would have been the mother, because in Judaism at this point, it was said that women should always lead the funeral procession since they brought death into the world. So imagine how she's feeling at this point. I like to imagine the 2 groups meeting, the silhouettes of these 2 groups meeting. Jesus in the front of his group, the widow of Nain in the front of hers. And Luke tells us that when he saw her, he had compassion. His heart went out to this woman because she's in a bad situation. Then Jesus does something he's not supposed to do. He reaches up and he touches the coffin. Now, in Judaism, that means he's unclean because he's touched something that's dead. But that's not how it works with Jesus. When he touches something that's dead, it becomes alive again, and the boy is raised. Luke says Jesus gave the boy back to his mother. Now, technically, it was the boy who was healed, but really, Jesus is giving her life back to her provision back to her through this son. Everyone's watching, and as we're coming to expect, as we listen to Luke, Luke tells us that everyone was amazed. Luke is the gospel of parables. He tells us more parables than any of the other gospels. But he does more. He shows us parables working. He'll tell us the composition of the crowd who's listening. He'll tell us what happens afterwards often, what the impact of the parable was. And that's something that makes him unique. This story is one of my favorites. It comes from chapter 7. Jesus is in the home of a Pharisee. Now remember, Luke was a companion of Paul, and Luke is very kind to the Pharisees. In fact, he shows us Jesus having a supper with 3 different Pharisees. This Pharisee's name is Simon. Jesus comes in, he sits down at the table, and he's reclining at the table, so his feet are out behind him. And a woman comes in, a nameless woman, we'll never know her name. And she has heard his message, and she is responding with a repentant heart, and she weeps, and and her tears fall on his feet. And she's so overcome that she does something she really shouldn't do. She takes the covering off her hair, loosens her hair, and wipes Jesus' feet with them. It's a tremendous show of affection and really over the top, because in Judaism, a woman was not supposed to let down her hair just before her husband. So very, very compassionate moment for her. Now Simon looks at this woman, and what you need to know is that when Simon sees people, he just sees categories. He sees Jesus and he says prophet. He sees the woman and he says sinner. And he wonders why in the world Jesus is letting this kind of woman touch him. And Jesus is very friendly, very open, not condemning at all. He turns to Simon. He says, Simon, I have something to tell you. And he says, well, tell me, Master. And then Jesus tells his little parable. It's just a couple of verses long. And it really is a miracle, this parable. It says, there were two men that one owed 500 pieces of silver, one owed 50, and the man that had loaned him the money forgave both of them their debts. And he says, Simon, which one will love him more? Simon says, well, I guess the one that owed the bigger debt. So what this parable does, it takes the answer. Simon knew the answer. In fact, usually the person knows the answer. The rich young ruler who asks, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" He knows the answer. The scribe who asks, "Who's his neighbor?" He knows the answer. But Jesus has to tell a parable that moves the answer from their head into their heart. See, the imagination, the bridge of the imagination between your head and your heart, a parable speaks to your imagination. So Jesus tells this parable and Simon knows the answer. But then Jesus unpacks it for him. See, Luke is giving us the setting of the parable. And he realizes that he loves little who's been forgiven little. And that's a parable of his life. Now we're left there. We don't know if Simon completely got it or not, but we know that he's had a chance for his heart and his head to come together. Don't you ever believe it when someone says that the Bible is somehow anti-woman. It's not true at all. In fact, this story, I think, is one of the most freeing stories in all of the Bible. And of course it would be Luke that would tell it to us, because Luke is the gospel that really cares about women. Martha and Mary, we know them from John. They're the sisters of Lazarus, but Lazarus doesn't figure into this story, only the two sisters. Now, I think this may be the first time he ever went to their house. We're not sure, but I think that's a good guess. Jesus has shown up with who knows how many people. I mean, he's got at least 70 people directly associated with him. He shows up to Martha and Mary's house at Martha's invitation, and they all sit down to eat. Now, I don't know if you can imagine feeding that many mouths. Mary, we are told, is where we always find her. She's at his feet. And in Judaism, to sit at someone's feet is really a metaphor for listening to them teach. In Acts 22, Paul says that he sat at the feet of Gamaliel. That means he really studied with him. So we find Mary seated at Jesus' feet. That's when Martha comes up with a very legitimate complaint. She says, "Lord, don't you care? Don't you care if my sister's not helped? Tell her to get up and help me." I mean, imagine accusing Jesus, of all people, of not caring. And Jesus responds. I think he's a little tired, but he responds very kindly. I think the double use of her name shows the pathos of the moment. He says, "Martha, Martha, you're worried about many things, but only one thing matters." And Mary's chosen that, and it's not going to be taken away from her. Now, I want you to see what a seismic shift this is in the first century. When women were on the fringe of society, rabbis didn't speak to their own wives in public. One of the rabbis said, "Better that the law be burned than delivered to a woman." That's the world. And in that setting, for Jesus to say, "It's better for a woman to be seated at my feet learning than to be working in the kitchen," you can almost feel the earth move. This is the moment we've been waiting for. The 12 have been chosen and trained. The 70 have been chosen. They've both gone out on mission together and come back rejoicing. Most importantly, the question, who is Jesus, has finally been answered. First by Peter in his great confession, but most importantly, by God himself on the top of that mountain. That's Mount Tabor, the traditional site of the transfiguration of Jesus. It's important that that question was settled before they left on their final trip to Jerusalem. So it's at this point in chapter 9 that Luke will tell us Jesus resolutely set his face for Jerusalem. So from now on, we're on the road with Jesus.
The prophet Isaiah, looking ahead, wrote, "For the Lord God will help me, therefore I will not be disgraced. Therefore I have set my face like a flint, and I know that I will not be ashamed." Isaiah chapter 50. Luke writes of Jesus, "Now it came to pass, when the time had come for him to be received up to heaven, that he steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem." Luke chapter 9.